My name is Evelyn Carter, and I never thought a simple weekend at my family's lake house could turn into a nightmare that would haunt me forever. I had driven 3 hours from Boston to Maine, excited for a rare break from my hectic life as a freelance journalist. The lake house had always been my safe haven growing up, a place where summers were long, the air smelled like pine and grilled corn, and my family's laughter echoed off the water. But that weekend, something felt off. From the moment I arrived, the smiles and cheerful greetings seemed slightly forced. The laughter, too loud, too deliberate, like it was covering something else. I chalked it up to my overactive imagination. After all, my parents, David and Laura Carter, and my younger brother Lucas, had always seemed so normal. But the feeling in my gut refused to let me shake it. Something was simmering beneath the surface. Little did I know, that uneasy feeling was the only thing keeping me alive that weekend. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first night, after unpacking my bag and letting the familiar creak of the wooden floors soothe me, I wandered into the living room where my family had gathered around the fireplace. The room smelled of cedar and a hint of vanilla from the candles my mother always insisted on burning. My father was scrolling through his phone, mumbling about work emails, while Lucas sat cross-legged on the rug, fiddling with a model airplane. Laura, my mother, was perched on the sofa with a glass of wine, her eyes darting occasionally to the window, as if expecting someone. I smiled and said hello, trying to hide the unease creeping into my chest. For the first hour, everything seemed normal. We laughed over old stories, poked fun at childhood mishaps, and played a few rounds of cards. But then Lucas, in a voice that was too casual, too rehearsed, said something that froze me mid-laugh. You know, Ev, it wouldn't be that hard to, take care of someone if you really wanted to. Just kidding, obviously. I laughed nervously, thinking he was trying to be edgy or funny, but something in the tone made me stop. There was no warmth in his words, no humor in his eyes, only a cold, calculating edge. Lucas, don't joke like that, I said, my voice firmer than I intended. My parents exchanged a glance that I couldn't interpret, something fleeting but loaded before my mother waved it off with a soft, "Oh, don't mind him, Ev. He's just being dramatic." I tried to convince myself it was nothing. After all, Lucas was known for his morbid sense of humor. But that night, as I lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling and listening to the wind rattle the windows, I couldn't shake the feeling that the words were more than a joke. The next morning, I decided to go for a walk along the lake, hoping the crisp air and the familiar scenery would calm me. The sun glinted off the water, the surface sparkling like shattered glass, and the forest around me whispered with the movement of wildlife. I tried to focus on the beauty, to remember that this was the place where I had spent countless summers swimming, canoeing, and camping. But even as I walked, my mind replayed Lucas's words, twisting them over and over, making my stomach tighten. When I returned, I found my mother in the kitchen, humming as she poured coffee. I attempted small talk, but she seemed distracted, almost tense. "Mom, did you hear what Lucas said last night?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She froze, then quickly smiled, placing a hand on my arm. "Oh, Evelyn, don't let him scare you. He was joking. Your father and I have told him 100 times not to talk like that. It's all just words." But the sense of unease only grew stronger. Something about the way she said it didn't match the look in her eyes, a flicker of worry that she quickly masked. I wanted to brush it off, to let the weekend be about relaxation, about family, about reclaiming some fragment of my childhood innocence, but I couldn't. Later that afternoon, I went to the small study off the hallway, a room I rarely entered. The desk drawers were usually locked, but today, the top one was slightly ajar. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside, I found a set of folded papers, neatly stacked. At first, I thought they were bills or notes, but as I unfolded one, my blood ran cold. It was a crudely written list. Names, dates, and instructions, like a plan meticulously detailing harm to someone, with one of the names being mine. My hands shook as I read through the details, the words jumping off the page, impossible to ignore. My heart pounded in my chest. I slammed the drawer shut, backed away, and leaned against the wall, trying to process what I had just seen.
I stumbled back to the living room, clutching the papers in my hand like a lifeline. Mom, Dad, Lucas, what is this? I demanded, my voice quivering. My father looked up from his phone, eyes narrowing, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. Evelyn, put that down. What are you talking about? I held the papers out, my hands trembling. This plan, it says... Before I could finish, Lucas snatched them from my hands, his face unreadable. Ev, seriously, you're overreacting. It's just a stupid joke. We were messing around, okay? Don't freak out. My mother's eyes pleaded with me to calm down, while my father finally set his phone aside, watching me with a cold, unreadable expression. The room felt smaller, suffocating, as the walls seemed to close in. I realized, with a chilling certainty, that the people I had trusted most in the world were capable of things I couldn't yet comprehend, and that my gut instinct, the one I had tried to ignore, had been screaming the truth all along. By the time the evening settled in, I felt trapped in a house that had once felt like home. Every smile now seemed like a mask, every gesture a calculated move. I stayed in my room, hyper-aware of every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the muted hum of the refrigerator, even the occasional distant call of a loon on the lake. I didn't know what to do, who to trust, or how to protect myself. Sleep was impossible. Fear had rooted me to my bed. That night, I swore to myself that I would uncover the truth behind those papers, no matter the risk. I didn't yet know what that truth would reveal, but deep down, I knew this weekend would change everything. My family, my life, and the sense of safety I had once taken for granted. The next morning, I forced myself out of bed, though every muscle in my body ached from tension and lack of sleep. The sun had barely risen, casting a pale glow over the lake, and the mist curling above the water made the scene look almost dreamlike, an illusion of peace that contrasted sharply with the storm brewing in my mind. I decided to make breakfast in the kitchen, hoping that routine could ground me. My mother was already there, humming softly as she poured cereal into a bowl. She smiled at me, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her fingers fidgeted with a spoon handle, and for a fleeting second, I saw a tension in her shoulders that confirmed my suspicion. Something was terribly wrong. I wanted to confront her about the papers from last night, but I also feared what that conversation could unleash. Still, I had to know. I couldn't pretend any longer. "Mom, I need you to be honest with me," I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could. "Those papers, that plan, what exactly is going on?" Laura's smile faltered. She set down the cereal box and took a deep breath, glancing over her shoulder to where my father was reading the morning news on his tablet. "Evelyn, please, it's nothing. You've misunderstood. It was a joke. Something Lucas and we were just, playing around." I stared at her, not believing a single word. "A joke? Mom, it literally says to hurt me. It lists names, instructions, dates. How is that a joke?" She hesitated, swallowing hard, then forced a laugh. "Words can be twisted, Ev. You're reading too much into it. You've always been a worrier. Please, try to relax. We just wanted to have some fun." The rational part of my brain screamed that her explanation was impossible. Her words didn't match the fear and precision I saw in the papers. That joke was too calculated, too methodical. I kept my eyes on her, searching for a crack, a hint that she was hiding something bigger than she would admit. Lucas entered the kitchen then, stretching and yawning, acting casual, as if nothing had happened. "Morning, Ev. Coffee?" he asked, trying to sound cheerful. I didn't respond. The silence between us grew thick, heavy with unspoken truths. My father finally looked up, his gaze steady and unblinking. "Evelyn, maybe you should drop this. It's better for all of us if you just let it go."
Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That afternoon, I wandered outside to the dock, hoping the rhythm of the water might clear my mind. The lake was serene, the waves gently lapping against the wooden pilings, but serenity offered no comfort. I kept replaying the scene from last night, the look in my brother's eyes, the fleeting expressions on my parents' faces. Something deep inside me screamed that they weren't joking. I decided that to protect myself, I needed evidence, something undeniable. I couldn't rely on instincts alone anymore. I started retracing the steps that had led me to the study, examining the room with meticulous attention. My eyes scanned the drawers, the papers, the notebooks, anything that could confirm or deny the horrifying truth I suspected. That's when I noticed a small envelope tucked behind the lamp on the desk, easily overlooked unless you knew what to look for. Inside the envelope were photographs, blurry but unmistakable. Images of a house I recognized from my childhood, my family posing with masks over their faces, and notes scribbled on the backs detailing hypothetical scenarios. The level of planning was staggering. Some of the notes described escape routes, timings, even possible witnesses. My stomach twisted into knots. The joke explanation was evaporating faster than I could blink. The truth was staring me in the face, clear and undeniable. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that my family had been talking in coded language, practicing, perhaps even testing boundaries, and they thought I wouldn't notice. As evening fell, I attempted to act normal, keeping my discoveries to myself while observing my family closely. Every comment, every gesture became a potential clue. Lucas would casually mention taking care of problems when passing the living room. My father would mutter about solving issues permanently when no one was looking. And my mother would offer gentle smiles, but the tension in her hands betrayed an inner turmoil that words could not hide. I couldn't escape the feeling that they were watching me as carefully as I was watching them, each of us testing the other in a silent, unspoken game of cat and mouse. By late evening, the weight of the discovery pressed down on me like a physical force. I barely slept, my mind racing through possibilities, devising ways to protect myself, to alert someone, to escape if necessary. I realized that trusting anyone inside the house was no longer an option. Even my instincts, which had never failed me before, couldn't provide the clarity I needed. I needed outside help, someone impartial who could assess the evidence without bias. But how could I reach anyone without alerting my family? The thought of calling the police felt both necessary and terrifying. If they were truly capable of following through on the plan, any wrong move could tip the balance in a horrifying way. I decided to gather every piece of evidence I could find, taking photographs with my phone, noting every suspicious conversation, and carefully hiding the originals in a locked suitcase under my bed. Every creak of the floorboards made me flinch. Every shadow seemed to follow me. I felt trapped, isolated, and terrified. Yet a part of me burned with determination. I would not be silenced. I would not let my family get away with whatever they were planning, no matter how painful or dangerous the truth turned out to be. That night, as I lay in the dark, listening to the lake and the wind through the trees, I made a silent vow. I would uncover the full extent of their intentions, and I would survive. Whatever it took, I would see this through to the end, even if it meant confronting horrors I wasn't ready to face. The next morning, the tension in the house felt almost tangible, like a heavy fog pressing down on my chest. I tried to keep up the illusion of normalcy, sitting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, as my family moved around me with the same casual motions that now seemed rehearsed and deliberate. My mind, however, was racing, replaying every detail from the previous night, connecting dots that should have remained separate. That's when it happened, the moment that shattered any remaining sense of safety I had clung to. Lucas, in his usual casual tone, said something that made my blood run cold. "Evie, maybe we should just get it over with, huh? Before it becomes messy." My fork froze halfway to my mouth, the clatter against my plate echoing unnaturally in the tense silence. My father glanced up from his newspaper, a flicker of something, expectation, anticipation, crossing his face before it disappeared. My mother's lips tightened into a line, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter. I realized in that instant that I could no longer dismiss the threat as a joke.
Panic clawed at my chest as I struggled to maintain composure. I needed to figure out if Lucas's comment was idle talk or if it signaled that their plan was actually moving forward. I excused myself from the table, claiming I wanted to check on the lake, and stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The wind stung my cheeks, and the scent of pine did little to soothe the knot of fear in my stomach. I took out my phone and scrolled through my notes, making a list of everything I had found. The papers, the photographs, Lucas's comments, my parents' reactions. Each piece was a tiny shard of evidence pointing to something horrific, and each added weight to the suffocating realization that I couldn't stay passive any longer. By mid-morning, I decided I needed to probe further without alerting them. I wandered into the study again, under the guise of looking for a book, but my real goal was to see if there were any additional papers or notes I had missed. That's when I found it. A small, locked box tucked under the desk, previously unnoticed. My heart thumped in my chest as I fumbled with the combination, recalling numbers from a calendar on the wall and snippets of conversation from the past few days. The box clicked open, revealing detailed blueprints of a house, lists of people with specific times, and more plans, this time with annotations in Lucas's handwriting. The level of calculation was beyond anything I had imagined. It wasn't a joke at all. It was a deliberate, thought-out plan, and I was the target. I backed away from the desk, clutching the contents of the box to my chest. 1,000 questions raced through my mind. Why my family? How long had they been planning this? And most terrifyingly, what had I done to provoke such intent? My head spun with possibilities, none of them comforting. That's when I heard a voice behind me, soft, almost casual, but carrying an unmistakable edge. "Evie, what are you doing in here?" My mother's tone was calm, but the way she stepped closer made my skin crawl. I held up the papers, my hands trembling. "I need to know the truth. These aren't jokes. Tell me what's going on." She froze, eyes widening slightly, and then her face softened into a mask of concern. "Evelyn, you don't understand. It's complicated. We weren't serious. We were just thinking, imagining scenarios. You're reading it wrong." Her words did nothing to calm me. I could feel the heat of adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Imagining scenarios? Mom, this is my life we're talking about. Look at these. This is real. It's planned. You and Dad and Lucas?" My voice caught, my throat tight. She interrupted, her own panic barely concealed. "Ev, stop. Please, you don't want to believe this. You're overreacting." But I couldn't stop. My mind was spinning with evidence, cross-referencing conversations, handwriting, photographs, the blueprints, the notes, every little detail. The pieces fit too perfectly. This was not imagination. This was intention. That night, I knew I had reached a point of no return. I could no longer pretend this was a joke, and I could no longer remain silent. I had to act, but cautiously. I created a hidden folder on my phone, photographing every document, every note, and every scrap of evidence I could find. I memorized the layout of the house, noting every potential exit, every window, every place someone could be hiding. Fear sharpened my senses. Every sound, the creak of the staircase, the shuffle of footsteps, the distant howl of a loon on the lake, made my pulse spike.
I realized that if I didn't protect myself, I could become the very person their plan was designed to eliminate. By the early hours of the morning, exhaustion finally overcame my terror, but not my vigilance. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what my next steps would be. I couldn't confront them directly again. They were unpredictable and dangerous. I couldn't trust a single word. I had to find external help, someone impartial, someone who could take my evidence seriously and act before it was too late. And that the thought of involving the police terrified me almost as much as the plan itself. What if a wrong move tipped them off? What if my family realized I was documenting everything? I knew that my survival depended on stealth, cunning, and careful planning.
By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the lake, I knew that the inciting incident, the point where my life would irreversibly change, had arrived. I could no longer ignore the signs, the documents, the words, or the intentions. My family had crossed a line, and I had no choice but to confront it. I didn't yet know how. I didn't yet know if I could, but the moment had come to decide whether I would remain a passive observer or take the first step toward survival. Whatever happened next, there was no going back. By the next morning, I realized I couldn't face this alone any longer. The fear gnawing at my chest had evolved into something sharper, a sense of urgency that demanded action. I needed someone outside the house, someone who could see the situation clearly without the emotional entanglement I had with my family. I decided to reach out to my friend and former college roommate, Harper Jennings, who now worked as a detective's assistant in Portland. She had always been practical, sharp-eyed, and incredibly resourceful, qualities I needed more than ever. I sent her a carefully worded message. "Harper, I need your help. It's urgent. I'll explain everything when I see you. Please trust me." Sending it felt like stepping off a cliff, but the weight of my family's plan left me no choice. After hitting send, I retreated to the study, scanning the room one last time for anything I might have missed. My eyes landed on the blueprints and photographs, the hidden notes, the lists, everything meticulously organized, everything horrifyingly real. I realized that until someone outside verified these materials, no one would believe me. My father, my mother, and Lucas were all capable of pretending, of gaslighting me, of masking the truth with casual words and forced smiles. The documents were undeniable, but I needed an impartial witness. I tucked everything into a small waterproof bag I had found in the garage, preparing to carry it with me if I had to leave the house. A few hours later, Harper arrived, driving down the long gravel driveway in her black SUV. Her presence brought a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. I met her at the edge of the forest, keeping a safe distance from the house, and quickly filled her in on everything: the papers, the photographs, the blueprints, Lucas's comments, and my parents' strange reactions. Harper's face shifted from concern to alarm as she listened, her eyes scanning the surrounding woods as if expecting the family to materialize from the trees. When I finished, she took a deep breath and said, "Evelyn, this is serious. What you're describing, it's not normal. We need to get this documented, immediately. You've done the right thing by keeping evidence hidden, but we can't wait. They might act faster than we think." With Harper's guidance, we devised a plan. She would bring a recording device, and I would carry the evidence bag. We would go back into the house, pretending I was retrieving a personal item, while she observed and recorded anything that might confirm my account. Every step we took felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of uncertainty. I knew my family was unpredictable. Any wrong move could set them off. My pulse pounded as we approached the front door, the familiar wood now looming like a barricade between safety and danger. Once inside, Harper positioned herself discreetly in the living room while I carefully retrieved the hidden bag from under my bed. My family, completely unaware of her presence, acted as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Lucas passed by, smirking, his casual demeanor grating against the terror I felt. I avoided eye contact, moving silently toward the study with the bag clutched tightly against my chest. My father, David, glanced up from his tablet, raising an eyebrow, but said nothing. My mother's lips twitched in a smile, though her eyes betrayed subtle tension. The entire room seemed charged with anticipation,
as if they were subconsciously aware that something had shifted. Once I returned to the living room, Harper discreetly activated the recording device. She pretended to read a book while I subtly opened the documents and spread them on the couch table. Harper whispered for me to read aloud a few excerpts, ensuring her microphone would capture every word. My hand shook as I did so, the words heavy with the weight of intent. The plans of my family had crafted with chilling precision. As I read, I noticed subtle reactions. Lucas's smirk faltered, a shadow of worry crashing across my father's face, and my mother's lips clenched the edge of the sofa. Their body language confirmed what the papers already told me. They knew the evidence was real, and they had been caught at least in part by someone outside their carefully constructed bubble.
The moment was brief, but it felt like an eternity. Harper gave me a subtle nod, signaling that she had captured enough. I quickly tucked the papers back into the waterproof bag, and we retreated to the edge of the forest, hearts hammering and adrenaline spiking. I could barely process the relief, tempered by the knowledge that my family now knew someone else had access to their secrets. That awareness alone could make them more dangerous, more cautious, or more desperate. We needed a plan to involve the authorities without tipping them off prematurely, and that required careful timing, discretion, and evidence that was airtight. Later that evening, back in my room, I reviewed the recordings Harper had made. Hearing my own voice reading the notes aloud, paired with the subtle reactions from my family, made the reality undeniable. This wasn't a misunderstanding nor a joke as they had claimed. The cold, calculated intention in the documents and the fleeting expressions of my parents and brother left no room for doubt. My pulse slowed only slightly as a wave of determination washed over me. This was the point of no return. Once I involved Harper, once evidence existed outside the family's control, there was no going back. I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. As the night drew on, I realized something terrifying yet empowering. My family had meticulously planned something heinous, but I now had the leverage to expose them. For the first time, the balance of power shifted slightly in my favor, not because I had confrontation or strength, but because I had witnesses, documentation, and an ally who understood the gravity of the situation. And yet, the knowledge that any misstep could provoke them weighed heavily. Every creak in the house, every distant sound of the lake, every shadow moving across the walls became a potential threat. I understood that the next steps were crucial. One wrong move could turn the situation deadly. But I also knew that the truth, finally witnessed by someone outside, could not be ignored. By the time I finally allowed myself to lie down, exhaustion overcame fear, if only temporarily. I stared at the ceiling, my mind replaying the events of the day and planning the next. I realized that I had passed the point of no return. My family's plan had been exposed to an outside party, and there was no going back to ignorance. The next stage of this ordeal would determine everything: safety, survival, and justice. But at least now, the truth had a chance to be seen, recorded, and acted upon. For the first time since discovering the plan, a sliver of hope glimmered amidst the dread. The days that followed were a delicate balance between surveillance and survival. I couldn't allow my family to suspect that I had involved Harper or that the evidence had left the house. Every interaction was loaded with tension, every glance carefully measured. Lucas, in particular, had taken to shadowing me, his casual remarks now tinged with a subtle edge that made my stomach twist. "You've been awfully busy lately, Ev, making friends, taking notes. What's that about?" His voice was smooth, almost playful, but I knew it was a probe, a test. I smiled politely, keeping my hands empty, and said nothing. My parents, meanwhile, seemed to oscillate between ignoring me and watching me with veiled suspicion. The house felt like a pressure cooker, every creak and whisper amplified, and I knew it was only a matter of time before their plan collided with my growing awareness. Harper and I spent long hours going over the recordings, photographs, and notes I had secured. We cataloged everything meticulously, creating a timeline of conversations, gestures, and written instructions that could serve as indisputable proof if needed. The more we analyzed, the clearer it became that my family's intentions were escalating. The instructions included contingency plans, backup strategies, and even psychological manipulation tactics designed to isolate me and make me vulnerable. Each discovery made my stomach churn and my pulse race, but it also steeled my resolve. I realized that in order to survive and ensure justice, I had to anticipate every possible reaction from them and plan accordingly. Despite the fear, I forced myself to interact with my family, maintaining a semblance of normalcy. I participated in meals, engaged in casual conversation, and even laughed at their jokes, though every chuckle felt hollow. I studied their behavior carefully, noting patterns, triggers, and inconsistencies. Lucas's sarcasm and dark humor were no longer harmless. They were a tool, a way to gauge my reactions and perhaps test whether I was aware of the plan. My father's calm exterior, once reassuring, now seemed cold and calculating. My mother's forced cheerfulness masked subtle anxiety, small signs that betrayed the magnitude of what I had uncovered. The more I observed, the more I realized that they were experts at masking intent, at manipulating appearances, and at controlling the narrative within the walls of our home.
As tension mounted, I noticed a shift in their behavior. Lucas began leaving notes in places I frequently visited, cryptic messages that were ostensibly harmless but carried a thinly veiled threat. One morning, I found a folded piece of paper on my bathroom mirror with a single line written in his familiar scrawl, "You can't hide from what's coming." My hands shook as I read it, and for the first time, the reality of the danger hit me with full force. This wasn't just a plan. It was active, evolving, and aware of my growing vigilance. Every day I delayed action was a day they might advance their intentions. Fear became a constant companion, threading through every interaction, every glance, every movement. Despite the escalating tension, Harper urged caution. "You have to be smart about this, Ev," she said one evening after we reviewed a particularly disturbing set of documents. "They're testing you, seeing what you know. If you overreact, they'll know, and then it's game over. You need to stay calm, collect evidence, and be ready for the moment we can involve law enforcement safely." I nodded, though calming my racing mind was easier said than done. Every footstep on the creaking floorboards, every shadow cast by the moonlight through the windows made my heart pound. I realized that the psychological toll of living under constant scrutiny, knowing that my family could be planning to harm me, was almost as exhausting as the physical danger. One night, as I lay awake listening to the wind rustle the trees outside, I realized that the opposition I faced wasn't just in the physical acts they might attempt. It was in the insidious, pervasive control they wielded over the household. The way my father and mother spoke, the way Lucas moved and laughed, even the subtle manipulations in the tone of casual conversation, all were calculated to destabilize me, to make me doubt my own perceptions. And yet, despite the fear, I felt a growing clarity. The very fact that I could observe, document, and anticipate their behaviors gave me a fragile edge. I couldn't confront them directly, but I could record, I could plan, and I could wait for the right moment to turn the evidence into action. As the days continued, I became adept at navigating the minefield of their home. I carried a small notebook everywhere, jotting down observations, noting inconsistencies, tracking movements and remarks. I observed Lucas pacing at odd hours, overheard snippets of my father muttering about finishing preparations, and witnessed my mother studying the layout of the house with a level of precision that made my blood run cold. Every interaction, every fleeting expression, every whispered word added to the tapestry of evidence I was building. Harper's guidance became invaluable, helping me categorize and interpret behaviors that might otherwise have seemed innocuous. Together, we were piecing together a picture that was horrifyingly clear. The plan was real. It was imminent, and it was sophisticated beyond what I had first imagined. By the end of the week, The rising opposition I faced became almost unbearable. The psychological strain of living in a home where every word, every look, every smile could conceal a threat was crushing. I couldn't relax, I couldn't lower my guard, and I couldn't allow my family to suspect that I had taken steps to protect myself. And yet, amid the fear, a flicker of determination grew stronger. I had evidence. I had an ally. I had the means to expose the truth. The challenge was to survive long enough to use it, to navigate the constant tension, and to ensure that the plan, however meticulously crafted, would never come to fruition. The night it all became undeniable started like any other, with the lake house bathed in moonlight and an eerie stillness settling over the surrounding woods. I had spent the day following my usual routine, pretending to be oblivious while observing my family, cataloging every word and gesture, keeping Harper updated through brief, coded messages. But that evening, I stumbled upon something I hadn't expected. A set of digital files hidden on a thumb drive tucked inside a rarely used cabinet in the study. It wasn't just written notes or photographs this time. It was a collection of recorded conversations, surveillance videos, and spreadsheets meticulously outlining every element of the plan. My hands shook as I inserted the drive into my laptop, the dim light of the screen illuminating my pale face. The files opened, and I could hardly breathe. This was no longer speculation, no longer circumstantial evidence. This was concrete, undeniable proof that my family had been planning something sinister.
The recordings showed my parents and Lucas discussing timing, contingency plans, and methods with chilling precision. They had logged dates, tested schedules, and even accounted for my habits. When I went for walks, when I checked my phone, when I typically stayed in the study to write. One video showed Lucas pacing the study while speaking into his phone. If she suspects, we'll have to move the date up. Can't risk hesitation. She's more perceptive than we expected. My father's voice was calm, but icy. Everything is in place. No one can interfere. Don't forget the final step if she tries to involve someone. My mother's voice followed, softer but no less terrifying. Just make sure she doesn't see the thumb drive. She can't know yet. Watching their faces and hearing their words, a cold realization settled over me. They had anticipated my suspicions and had built layers of secrecy to keep the plan intact. I felt a wave of nausea, the full weight of betrayal and danger crashing down. These were the people I had trusted most in my life, the ones who had nurtured me, loved me, and guided me, and yet they were plotting to harm me with meticulous calculation. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing through every conversation, every smile, every gesture over the past week. Every subtle tension, every cryptic remark suddenly made sense. Nothing had been accidental. Every detail, every interaction had been a test, a way to assess my awareness and control my perception. I realized the enormity of what I had uncovered. But amid the fear and disbelief, a steely clarity emerged. I now had the evidence needed to prove the truth. I had files that captured intent, planning, and deliberation in a way that could not be denied. I immediately began backing up everything, copying the files to multiple secure locations, encrypting them, and sending small portions to Harper in real time. She responded immediately with calm but urgent instructions. Ev, you need to stay hidden and continue documenting, but don't engage directly with them until we have law enforcement ready. We have the proof now, and it's undeniable. They cannot claim it's a joke anymore. I felt a strange combination of relief and terror. Relief that I had proof, that the truth could not be ignored. Terror because I understood how dangerous it had become. My family might notice the missing files, the movement, or even my subtle changes in behavior. They were unpredictable, and their ability to manipulate and deceive was immense. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer, every sound felt amplified, and every glance from my parents or Lucas felt loaded with hidden meaning. I realized that from this point forward, every move I made had to be strategic, every interaction measured, because now the truth had teeth, and the stakes were higher than ever. That evening, Harper and I devised a careful plan to begin alerting authorities without tipping my family off. We encrypted the files, cataloged them, and prepared a detailed timeline of evidence documenting dates, interactions, and the progression of their planning. We discussed contingencies, escape routes, and potential responses my family might have if they discovered I had breached their secrecy. Each layer of preparation felt like assembling a shield against an invisible, omnipresent threat. I realized that the undeniable proof had changed the dynamic completely. I was no longer in a position of blind fear. I now had a foundation to demand intervention, to protect myself, and to ensure that justice could be pursued. As the night deepened, I sat in the study reviewing the recordings again. The weight of realization pressed down, but it was tempered by an emerging sense of empowerment. I understood my family's intentions fully now, and I had a strategy forming. The turning point had arrived, not through confrontation, but through evidence that could not be denied, documents and recordings that captured the truth in every form, written, visual, and auditory. Their carefully constructed web of deception had crumbled under scrutiny, and I had the undeniable proof that would force the world to see what I had uncovered. By the time the first hints of dawn touched the lake, I felt a fragile but growing sense of hope. I had passed the point of desperation, crossing into the stage where clarity and proof replaced uncertainty and fear. I could finally see the path forward, even if the steps were dangerous and fraught with risk. The undeniable proof had changed everything. It validated my instincts, gave me leverage, and created a foundation from which I could act decisively. For the first time, I believed I could survive the ordeal, expose the truth, and ensure that justice would prevail. The nightmare was far from over, but the turning point had come, and nothing could undo the clarity that now illuminated the path ahead.
The morning after uncovering the thumb drive, I woke with a weight in my chest that I could no longer ignore. For days, I had tiptoed around my family, pretending to be oblivious, cataloging their every word and gesture while fear gnawed at me from the inside. But now, with undeniable proof in my hands, I realized that pretending any longer would only endanger me. The choice had come. I could continue to protect them, maintain the illusion of normalcy, and live under the threat of their plan. Or I could act, expose the truth, and take my first real steps toward survival. There was no halfway point, no neutral ground. I made a quiet vow to myself as I dressed and prepared breakfast. I would no longer shield them from consequences, and I would not allow fear to dictate my life. As I moved through the kitchen, carrying my coffee with hands that still shook from the adrenaline of last night, I kept my eyes on my parents. They were laughing over some trivial joke Lucas had made, but I saw the subtle cues, the tension in my mother's shoulders, the flicker of something sharp in my father's gaze that betrayed their awareness of my recent actions. I felt a mixture of fear and determination, understanding that the dynamic in the house had shifted irrevocably. My family no longer had complete control. They knew I was aware, and that awareness was power I had not had before. My decision to stop protecting them would not only place me directly in opposition to their intentions, but also force a confrontation that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. I spent the morning quietly gathering evidence, making additional copies of the thumb drive, and backing up the recordings on a secure cloud service. Every file, every photograph, every note became a shield I could rely on. Harper had advised me to maintain the facade, to act as if nothing had changed while preparing to involve the authorities at the right moment. But I couldn't stay passive. I needed to signal, subtly, that I was no longer a passive participant in their manipulation. I began leaving small signs that I was aware, placing certain documents where they might be glimpsed but not easily identified, a psychological reminder that I was no longer entirely under their control. By late afternoon, the tension had reached a peak. Lucas approached me as I worked in the study, leaning against the doorway with a smirk that no longer appeared playful. "You've been busy," said Lucas, voice casual but edged with something darker. "Gathering things, huh? Planning your next move?" I looked up calmly, masking the storm inside me. Just organizing some papers, Lucas. Nothing important. My mother watched from the kitchen, her smile strained, hands gripping the counter, a silent calculation in her gaze. My father, sitting nearby with a newspaper, glanced up occasionally, observing, weighing, waiting for a misstep. I realized in that moment that my decision to confront the truth had changed everything. My family was aware of my awareness, and the house had transformed into a stage where every action, every word, every look carried consequences. The choice to speak, to act, had to be deliberate. I couldn't afford mistakes. I spent hours mapping out the next steps, contacting the police, ensuring Harper was involved, creating a trail of evidence that left no room for doubt. I reviewed the recordings repeatedly, noting timestamps, voices, and visual cues. Each replay reinforced the reality. This was not a game, nor a joke, nor a misunderstanding. Their plan was meticulous, calculated, and imminently dangerous. And now, by choosing to stop protecting them, I had crossed a line. There was no returning to ignorance. There was no returning to trust. The decision to speak would set everything into motion. That evening, during dinner, I tested the waters. I asked casual questions, probing for inconsistencies, observing reactions. Lucas responded with irritation, my father with measured calm, and my mother with faint anxiety that she quickly masked. I realized that the first cracks in their composure were showing. Their confidence in secrecy was faltering, and the psychological pressure I had carried for days was beginning to shift toward them. I felt a cautious sense of empowerment. The choice to stop protecting them and face the truth had given me leverage. The next step would be critical, and I had to approach it with precision. After dinner, I retreated to the study, packing a small bag with additional evidence, my phone, and a flashlight. I checked my hiding spots, ensuring everything was secure, then texted Harper, "It's time. I'm ready to involve the authorities." Her reply came quickly, calm but urgent. "Good. Stay safe. Make sure they don't suspect anything yet. We move carefully." I understood the stakes. My family was capable of extreme measures, and any sign of panic or aggression on my part could provoke them. But the decision to speak, to take action, had already been made. I had chosen to confront the truth rather than remain a passive participant in a terrifying secret. Late that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I reflected on the transformation that had occurred. For weeks, fear had dominated my life, keeping me silent, keeping me compliant. But now, with undeniable proof and a plan for action, I had reclaimed some measure of control. I had chosen to stop protecting the very people who had betrayed me, and in doing so, I had embraced the difficult, dangerous path of survival. I understood that the choice to speak would bring consequences, challenges, and potential retaliation, but it was the only path that offered a chance at safety and justice. By the early hours of the morning, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The decision had been made, and with it came responsibility. I could no longer be complicit in silence. I could no longer ignore the threat or hope it would dissipate. My family's plan was real, but so was my resolve. I had chosen to act, and that choice would define everything that followed: the confrontation, the evidence, the authorities, and ultimately, my own survival. The line had been crossed, and from that moment on, there was no turning back. The next morning, the air in the house felt electric, heavy with unspoken tension. I could sense that my family had noticed a shift in my demeanor. The subtle confidence I carried, born from the undeniable proof and the choice to act, seemed to disturb them. Lucas lingered in hallways, pretending to be casual, but the way his eyes darted toward me whenever I moved betrayed suspicion. My mother hovered near the kitchen counter, her fingers drumming lightly, her smile tighter than usual. And my father, David, watched silently, his gaze calm but unyielding, as if he were assessing the depth of my newfound awareness. The psychological chessboard had shifted. The confrontation was no longer hypothetical, it was inevitable. Every interaction became a test, a calculation of motives, and a silent battle of wills.
I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The mounting pressure required a proactive stance. Harper had advised me to stay vigilant, documenting every reaction, every slip, every veiled threat. The evidence now existed both physically and digitally, but I needed to observe how my family reacted under pressure. That morning, I deliberately brought up a minor, seemingly innocuous detail from the thumb drive. A timestamp, a note, something they believed I had not noticed. Lucas's reaction was instantaneous. His smirk faltered, and he froze mid-step, a flicker of panic flashing across his face, before he masked it with a casual shrug. My father's hands tightened around the edge of the newspaper, and my mother's lips pressed together, eyes narrowing. I realized in that instant that the balance of power had begun to shift. They were aware that I knew, and now the psychological pressure was reciprocated. As the day unfolded, the subtle confrontations escalated. Lucas made pointed remarks, veiled threats disguised as jokes, each designed to test my responses and unsettle me. "You've been very curious lately, Eve," he said casually while passing me in the hallway. "Curiosity can be dangerous, you know." I smiled politely, keeping my tone even, masking the storm inside. "I just like to stay organized," I replied, subtly signaling that I was fully aware of his words. My parents observed silently, their expressions betraying concern and calculation. The mounting pressure was undeniable. Every move, every glance, every carefully measured word became a confrontation, a test of my resolve, and a battle for psychological dominance. By mid-afternoon, I noticed a change in the household rhythm. My father moved more deliberately, checking locks, scanning rooms, and adjusting schedules as if preparing for contingencies. My mother's nervous energy intensified. She was meticulous in small tasks, arranging and rearranging items, perhaps trying to assert control or maintain a facade of normalcy. And Lucas, increasingly frustrated by my composure, began leaving small, cryptic messages in places I frequented. On my desk, tucked between books, even on the refrigerator. Each message was brief, threatening, and calculated to unsettle me. But they also confirmed what I already knew. My family's intentions had not wavered, but my awareness and preparation had changed the dynamic. That evening, I retreated to the study with Harper's guidance, reviewing the recordings and notes yet again. I documented every interaction, every subtle threat, and every reaction to my probing. The patterns were clear. The family's plan was designed to isolate, intimidate, and control. But my deliberate observation and preparation had introduced variables they had not accounted for. I realized that confrontation did not need to be explosive to be effective. By remaining calm, documenting evidence, and responding strategically, I could apply pressure, disrupt their expectations, and gather critical information that would strengthen the case against them.
The direct confrontation came later that night. I was sitting at the kitchen table, reviewing notes and preparing for a secure backup of the thumb drive when Lucas suddenly leaned over my shoulder, his tone deceptively casual. "You think you're clever, huh?" he asked, his smirk failing to hide the edge in his voice. "Watching, recording, planning. Do you really think you can outsmart us?" I didn't flinch. I closed the notebook slowly, meeting his gaze steadily. "I'm just paying attention," I said softly, my voice calm but resolute. My father stepped into the kitchen, arms crossed, and my mother appeared behind him, both watching like predators calculating the next move. The room felt charged, tense, every heartbeat amplified. The mounting pressure had transformed into an unavoidable confrontation. The truth was being tested against their denial and control. In the hours that followed, I noticed further cracks in their composure. Lucas paced at odd intervals, muttering under his breath, while my mother fussed with tasks she had performed perfectly before. My father's calm exterior was punctuated by subtle moments of impatience, hands clenching and unclenching, eyes narrowing. The confrontation was not violent, but it was total. Every gesture, every glance, every word was a subtle battle. I realized that by choosing to confront the truth, by stopping my compliance and documenting everything, I had forced the family into a corner. They were no longer entirely in control, and their facade of normalcy was beginning to unravel. By the time I retreated to my room late that night, the adrenaline still thrummed through me. The mounting pressure of the confrontation had tested my composure and resolve, and I had emerged aware, alert, and increasingly confident. I knew the family could escalate, that retaliation was possible, but I had also seen their cracks, their hesitation, their fear of exposure. For the first time, I felt the psychological advantage shift in my favor, not because I was stronger, but because the undeniable truth had power, and I had chosen to act. The confrontation had begun, and the battle of awareness, strategy, and courage would define everything that followed. The days following the confrontation with Lucas and my parents were unbearable, a slow burn of fear, doubt, and mounting isolation. I had made the decision to stop protecting them, to act on the undeniable proof, and yet the immediate consequences of that choice began to weigh on me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Their reactions, subtle but sharp, grew more calculated and tense. Lucas became increasingly unpredictable, his sarcasm turning colder, his casual threats more pointed. I noticed him lingering near the doors and windows, as if measuring my movements, tracking my habits. My father, once calm and seemingly invincible, now displayed a rigidity in posture, a sharpness in his gaze, as though anticipating any misstep I might make. And my mother, whose role had always been the emotional anchor, now exuded a quiet intensity that felt more like surveillance than maternal concern. I felt trapped in a web where every action I took was scrutinized, every word dissected. The house, once familiar, now felt like a cage. That night, exhaustion overtook me, but my mind refused to rest. I lay in bed, listening to the rhythmic creak of the old floorboards above the lake, trying to calm the panic gnawing in my stomach. The psychological toll was immense. The fear was no longer abstract. It was tangible, pressing down on me with every passing hour. My thoughts spiraled. What if they noticed the evidence I had backed up? What if Lucas decided to act before the authorities could intervene? What if Harper was fast enough to protect me? I realized I had underestimated the emotional cost of standing up to them, the loneliness of knowing that the people I loved most were the ones I could no longer trust. My heart ached, not just from fear, but for grief for the family I had believed in, now revealed as a source of imminent danger. The isolation was compounded by the need for constant vigilance. I couldn't leave my room without calculating every possible exposure. Every creak in the hallway, every shadow cast by the moonlight through the trees sent adrenaline surging through me. Even minor sounds, a dropped utensil in the kitchen, the scrape of a chair, felt magnified, potential threats signaling that their plan could advance at any moment. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, mentally rehearsing escape routes, memorizing where I could hide, and thinking through contingencies if confrontation escalated into violence. The psychological fatigue was exhausting, but there was no relief. Sleep was a fragile barrier, easily broken by the looming threat that my family's plan could still unfold despite my precautions. As the hours wore on, the emotional weight intensified. I realized the consequences of speaking the truth were immediate and severe. My family's subtle intimidation had begun to erode my confidence. Moments of doubt crept in. Whispers of fear in my mind. Had I misinterpreted something? Was it possible that the plan wasn't as serious as I feared? And yet every document, every recording, every observation reinforced the reality. They had intended harm. The proof was unassailable. Still, knowing the truth did little to shield me from the emotional onslaught.
I felt simultaneously empowered and broken, aware that action was necessary, but overwhelmed by the risks of doing so.
During one particularly tense evening, Lucas confronted me directly in the study. His voice was low, almost conspiratorial, but every word carried an edge. "You've been very observant, Ev. Watching, recording. You think you're clever, don't you?" I looked at him evenly, forcing calm into my tone, but inside, my chest raced. My pulse pounded as I weighed my words. "I'm just paying attention," I replied. He smirked, a shadow of menace passing through his expression. My father entered silently, his presence like a tightening vice, and my mother followed, calm but alert, eyes flicking between us like a predator assessing prey. The subtle confrontation left me drained, the emotional toll magnified by fear, betrayal, and the suffocating awareness that the people who were supposed to protect me were now my most immediate threat. That night, I lay awake replaying every interaction, every step, every glance. The consequences of speaking the truth had become concrete: sleepless nights, constant vigilance, isolation, and the constant, unrelenting fear of retaliation. I felt the physical and emotional toll pressing down on me, the trembling hands, the shallow breaths, the heart racing at every unexpected sound. Doubts and fear threatened to overwhelm me. I felt small, powerless, and utterly alone. The nightmare I had uncovered was no longer confined to documents and evidence. It had become my daily reality, infiltrating every aspect of my life. And yet, amid the darkness, a sliver of clarity emerged. I had survived this long because I had evidence, preparation, and an ally outside the house. Harper's presence, though distant, provided a lifeline. I realized that the despair I felt, though overwhelming, was part of the process, the dark night of the soul that forced me to confront the consequences of action, the reality of danger, and the fragility of trust. It was a crucible, testing not just my resolve, but my ability to navigate fear, uncertainty, and isolation while holding on to the truth. By the early morning hours, I had made a mental decision. I would endure the consequences. I would navigate the fear, the loneliness, the threats, and the exhaustion, because the alternative, silence, compliance, and potential harm, was far worse. I had crossed the point of no return, and now the dark night of the soul was testing whether I had the strength, courage, and resilience to see this through. The path ahead would be harrowing, the emotional toll severe, but I understood one immutable truth. Survival and justice required enduring this lowest point, facing the backlash, and preparing for the final push that would bring the truth into the light. The morning sunlight cutting through the blinds felt almost like a new beginning, yet every ray carried the weight of anticipation. I had spent the previous night meticulously reviewing all the evidence once again: thumb drives, photographs, recordings, notes, and timestamps. Everything had to be perfect. Harper had coordinated with a trusted detective to ensure that law enforcement would be involved, and they had planned to arrive at a time when the family would be unaware. This was it. The final push, the moment when the truth would be laid bare, when all of the careful observation, documentation, and psychological endurance would converge into action. I felt a mixture of terror and determination. The stakes were higher than ever, but there was no turning back. Every precaution I had taken, every detail I had noted, every plan Harper and I had devised was about to be tested in reality. I moved through the house quietly, carrying the encrypted evidence bag like a shield. Lucas, my mother, and my father were all in their usual routines, but I could feel the subtle tension that had built over days of psychological chess. They had grown wary, cautious, and even restless. The knowledge that I had already crossed the point of no return, combined with the evidence sitting in my hands and in Harper's hands, made the environment crackle with anticipation. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside felt magnified. I had rehearsed my actions countless times in my mind.
but the reality of the impending confrontation made my pulse race in a way no rehearsal could prepare me for. I waited for the moment Harper had identified, a time when my family would be in the living room, unsuspecting, while the authorities quietly approached the house. As the minutes stretched, I felt a mix of dread and resolve. The final push required patience and composure. I reminded myself to breathe steadily, to move deliberately, and to maintain the calm exterior that would ensure the safety of everyone involved. My mind replayed the recordings and documents, reinforcing the reality. The evidence was irrefutable, there was no room for doubt, no loophole for manipulation, no chance of being dismissed. The truth was about to stand on trial, and I was the one bringing it forward. When the doorbell finally rang, signaling law enforcement's arrival, the house seemed to hold its breath. Lucas glanced toward the sound with suspicion, my mother's hands tightened on the counter, and my father's eyes narrowed. I felt my own heart pound as I led the detectives through the front door, keeping my movements calm, controlled, and seemingly casual. Harper stayed close, discreetly coordinating with the officers. The tension in the room was palpable. My family's carefully constructed facades began to falter under the weight of anticipation. Every gesture, every glance, every small movement was now scrutinized not just by me, but by trained authorities ready to intervene.
As the officers quietly entered, I began presenting the evidence. I guided them to the study where the thumb drive had been found, explaining the significance of each file, each recording, and each document. My voice, steady despite the adrenaline, carried the gravity of the revelations, Lucas's messages, my parents' discussions, the contingency plans, and the meticulous planning of actions that could have endangered me. As the officers reviewed each item, I could see the impact, the realization that this was more than a family dispute, more than petty conflict. This was deliberate, premeditated intent captured in cold, unassailable detail. My family's masks began to slip. Subtle micro-expressions betrayed panic, frustration, and fear. The confrontation reached its peak when the officers asked Lucas and my parents to explain themselves. My father attempted to maintain composure, his voice measured and calm, but every word rang hollow in the presence of the recordings and documents. My mother faltered, caught between denial and the undeniable evidence. Lucas's arrogance crumbled into thinly veiled panic as the detectives presented his own recorded statements. The visual and auditory proof left no room for their manipulations. Their carefully rehearsed narratives could not withstand the factual weight laid before them. The room was tense, almost suffocating, as the undeniable truth confronted years of deceit. I felt a strange sense of validation amidst the tension. My voice, my actions, and my courage had brought the hidden reality into the open. For the first time since discovering the plan, the full magnitude of their deception was visible not just to me, but to impartial witnesses who have authority and expertise. The psychological pressure I had endured for days, the isolation, the fear, the sleepless nights, all of it had culminated in this moment where truth and justice could finally begin to assert themselves. The officers methodically documented everything, secured the evidence, and began processing my family. I observed the subtle breakdown in their defenses and realized the shift that had occurred. Control had moved from them to the undeniable facts and those empowered by them. After the initial confrontation, the house felt strangely empty, charged with a silence that was both terrifying and relieving. My family had been temporarily contained, the plan disrupted, and the authorities in control. I allowed myself to breathe, a tension I hadn't realized I was holding, slowly releasing from my shoulders. Harper gave me a subtle nod, acknowledging the culmination of our careful planning, the execution of the final push that had transformed months of fear into action. I realized that the climax was not just about law enforcement stepping in, it was about the power of evidence, observation, and courage confronting deliberate deception. The truth had finally taken center stage, and my voice, once silenced by fear, had been heard and validated in the most formal and undeniable way possible. By the end of the day, the immediate danger had passed,
but I knew that recovery and consequences were just beginning. The final push, the presentation of truth, had been executed successfully, yet the aftermath would require patience, resilience, and continued vigilance. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a fragile sense of relief. The confrontation had occurred, the truth had been laid bare, and the battle for justice had begun. My courage, preparation, and unwavering commitment to exposing the plan had turned fear into action, and the truth had emerged victorious. The days after the confrontation felt surreal, like stepping into a world where reality was finally aligned with truth. My family was confined under police custody while the investigation unfolded, and the house, once a source of constant dread, had transformed into a space of cautious relief. I walked through the familiar rooms, observing the light falling across the floors, the creak of the old staircase, and the silence that no longer carried threats. Every detail, once a reminder of fear, now seemed imbued with possibility, a chance to rebuild, to reclaim my life from the shadow of deception. The initial aftermath of truth revealed itself not as immediate comfort, but as a slow, grounding process where the weight of danger began to lift, replaced by the anticipation of justice and validation. Law enforcement worked methodically, reviewing the recordings, notes, and digital files I had compiled, corroborating my account with the clarity of evidence. Each review reaffirmed that the plan my family had devised was not a joke or fantasy, but a deliberate, premeditated intent to harm. Detectives spoke in calm, professional tones, explaining how my documentation had created a strong foundation for charges, ensuring accountability that could not be ignored. I listened, sometimes in disbelief, as they detailed how my careful preservation of evidence had not only safeguarded my life, but had also provided the irrefutable proof necessary to prevent my family from continuing their plan. The validation was overwhelming, a mix of relief and vindication that my instinct had been right all along.
I also began receiving support from outside the immediate circle. Harper's network, neighbors who had witnessed small but significant behaviors, and friends who provided emotional reinforcement. Each acknowledgement of my courage strengthened my resolve and underscored the power of speaking truth in the face of betrayal. The story of my family, once hidden and twisted, was now being exposed to those equipped to intervene. The ripple effects of my decision to confront the truth were profound. Authority, evidence, and vigilance combined to create a shield that finally allowed me to breathe, if only cautiously, and to regain a sense of control over my own life. The legal process, though reassuring, carried its own tension. I attended meetings with detectives and lawyers, providing testimony, clarifying timelines, and answering detailed questions about the evidence. Every session required me to relive the fear, betrayal, and constant vigilance I had endured, but it also reinforced the fact that my courage had concrete impact. My family's manipulation and calculated plan were documented and scrutinized, each step verified, each interaction examined. It was exhausting emotionally and mentally, yet empowering. For the first time, I could see the truth prevailing over lies, that the systems in place could hold even those closest to you accountable when the evidence was irrefutable. At home, the transformation was tangible. Rooms that had once felt oppressive now carried a quiet, protective aura. I began reclaiming spaces I had avoided, moving freely without fear of surveillance or threat. The psychological burden of constant vigilance gradually lifted, replaced by a measured sense of autonomy. I could hear the wind through the trees without flinching, walk across the creaking floorboards without calculating every step, and even sit at the kitchen table without the subtle tension of observation pressing down. The house, which had been a stage for manipulation, was now simply my home again, a place where the truth had restored balance and offered the first taste of normalcy in weeks. Beyond the immediate environment, the vindication carried profound emotional impact. The betrayal I had endured, though still painful, was now framed within a narrative of justice rather than helplessness. I could acknowledge the deceit, manipulation, and threat with clarity, understanding that my courage and diligence had prevented potential harm and ensured accountability. Friends and supportive allies offered their validation, reinforcing the truth that my actions had not only safeguarded my own life, but had also illuminated the danger in ways that could prevent further manipulation or harm to others. The psychological weight of isolation, fear, and threat gradually transformed into a sense of accomplishment, resilience, and empowerment. By midweek, the initial investigations were complete enough that detectives provided feedback on the anticipated outcomes. They explained how my meticulous documentation, calm composure during confrontations, and the foresight to involve law enforcement had created a record that was virtually unassailable. They praised the clarity, organization, and completeness of the evidence, noting that it would lead to formal charges and interventions that ensure safety. The realization that my actions had tangible legal consequences reinforced the lesson that truth, courage, and preparation can overcome even the most calculated deceit. I felt a profound sense of relief, tempered by awareness that the process was not over, but the immediate danger had been neutralized. Emotionally, I began to process the transformation I had undergone. The weeks of fear, isolation, and constant vigilance had forged a resilience I didn't realize I possessed. The culmination of the final push, confrontation, and law enforcement involvement validated my instincts, reaffirmed my courage, and established a new standard for how I could navigate challenges. I felt empowered not only to protect myself, but also to recognize manipulation, deceit, and threat in the future. The vindication extended beyond legal accountability. It affirmed my agency, my awareness, and my capacity to transform fear into strategic, decisive action. By the end of Part 11, I understood that justice was more than punishment. It was recognition of truth, validation of courage, and restoration of personal agency. My family's plan had been halted, exposure had occurred, and the systems in place had confirmed the accuracy of my observations. The resolution was not merely external, it was internal, a reclaiming of power, autonomy, and trust in my own judgment. I had survived the ordeal, documented the truth, and set in motion consequences that restored balance. The sense of vindication, though tempered by lingering emotional scars, carried the profound clarity that courage, vigilance, and meticulous action could overcome even the most insidious betrayal. Weeks had passed since the police had taken my family into custody, and the house, once a cage of fear and deception, now felt like a sanctuary of reclaimed space. The heavy tension that had filled every room seemed almost alien now, replaced by a quiet peace that I could almost believe was permanent. I moved freely through the rooms that had been battlegrounds of subtle psychological warfare, touching the worn wooden surfaces without hesitation, breathing without calculating every step, and even sit at the kitchen table without the subtle tension of observation pressing down. The house, which had been a stage for manipulation, was now simply my home again. A place where the truth had restored balance and offered the first taste of normalcy in weeks.
Emotionally, the shift was profound. The weeks of fear, sleepless nights, and constant vigilance had left scars, but they were tempered now by a sense of empowerment and resilience I hadn't known I possessed. I reflected on how every choice, the decision to stop protecting them, the documentation of undeniable proof, the courage to involve authorities, had forged a path from helplessness to agency. There was still grief, of course, for the family I had believed in and the life that could have been, but it was interlaced with pride and validation. I understood that transformation is rarely immediate, but cumulative. Each moment of courage, each decision to act, had reshaped me into someone who could confront fear, navigate betrayal, and emerge stronger. With the immediate threat neutralized, I began thinking about the broader implications of my experience. I started writing a journal, not merely to document events, but to capture the lessons learned, the subtle signs of manipulation, the importance of preparation, the power of undeniable evidence, and the courage it takes to confront truth. I wanted to ensure that my ordeal could serve as a guide for others, a testament to the possibility of survival and vindication even in situations that seemed insurmountable. The act of writing, organizing thoughts, and reflecting on each step provided a therapeutic rhythm, helping me to process the emotional toll while reinforcing the clarity and purpose that had carried me through the darkest moments. I also began reconnecting with friends and supportive allies. The isolation that once magnified fear was replaced by shared stories, laughter, and a sense of belonging. For the first time in weeks, I felt the warmth of human connection without the undercurrent of suspicion or danger. Harper remained a steady presence, helping me navigate practical concerns while also offering emotional support. Our conversations no longer revolved solely around survival. They included discussions of future plans, aspirations, and how to channel my experience into something meaningful. This reconnection reinforced the sense of purpose that had been emerging. Survival was not just about enduring danger, but about transforming that experience into strength and insight. The external consequences for my family had begun to crystallize. Legal proceedings ensured accountability, while authorities reviewed the meticulous evidence I had preserved. Every document, every recording, and every observation contributed to a framework that would prevent them from repeating their plans and held them to justice. Observing the system function, seeing truth validated through authority, and understanding that justice could be enacted even against those closest to me reinforced the transformative power of courage coupled with evidence. I felt a quiet satisfaction, not vengeance, but a deep sense of alignment between truth and consequence. As the days turned to weeks, I began to envision a life beyond mere survival. I explored avenues to help others, to share my story in a way that could provide guidance, encouragement, or simply recognition that others could navigate similar hidden threats. I thought about volunteering, writing, and mentoring, ways to channel the resilience and strategic awareness I had developed into actionable impact. For the first time, the narrative of my life felt proactive rather than reactive, shaped not by fear and manipulation, but by informed choice and purposeful action. The transformation was complete. I had emerged from fear not just intact, but empowered. On a quiet afternoon, sitting by the lake with a journal in hand, I reflected on how far I had come. The sunlight danced across the water, the breeze carried a gentle sense of calm, and the world felt both familiar and new. The nightmare had tested me in ways I could scarcely have imagined, but I had endured, documented the truth, confronted the perpetrators, and witnessed justice unfold. I had navigated fear, betrayal, and isolation and emerged with clarity, courage, and the beginnings of a purposeful life. Every step had been deliberate, every choice rooted in awareness, and every action had contributed to a transformation that was profound, tangible, and deeply personal. As I closed the journal, I realized that my life had been irrevocably altered, but not broken. The power of truth, courage, and preparation had given me a foundation upon which to rebuild, grow, and help others. I was no longer merely Evelyn, the victim of betrayal. I was Evelyn, the survivor, the witness, and the advocate for truth. The lake reflected the sunlight, undisturbed and clear, much like the path I had carved from darkness into light. My transformation was complete. Peace, empowerment, and purpose were no longer distant ideals. They were my reality, my new equilibrium, and my message to the world. Courage and truth, when wielded decisively, can overcome even the most insidious deception.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.